October 1963. Sammy Davis Jr. was driving through Central California wine country when he saw a handwritten sign nailed to a fence post. Farm auction Saturday, 10 a.m. Everything must go. Something about the desperation in those capital letters made him slow down. 3 days later, he walked into that auction and did something that would change a widow's life forever, and teach a small farming community a lesson about judging people by their bank accounts instead of the color of their skin. Sammy was in California's Central Valley, performing a series of shows in Fresno and Bakersfield, taking the scenic route between venues to clear his head after a brutal month of touring. The civil rights movement was reaching its peak, and being a black entertainer who'd recently married a white woman meant Sammy was getting death threats alongside his fan mail. He needed a break from crowds and stages and the constant pressure of being Sammy Davis Jr. That's why, when he saw the auction sign, he made note of the address and decided to show up. Not because he needed farmland, not because he was looking for an investment, but because auctions were human drama in its purest form, and sometimes watching other people's problems helped him forget his own. Saturday morning arrived cool and clear, perfect weather for an outdoor auction. Sammy drove his Cadillac down a dirt road until he reached a modest ranch house surrounded by about 40 acres of grapevines. 50 or 60 people were already gathered, most of them local farmers, judging by their work boots and sun-weather faces. When Sammy stepped out of his car wearing sunglasses and a leather jacket, every conversation stopped mid-sentence. He could read the room instantly. This wasn't hostile exactly, but it was suspicious. A black man in expensive clothes showing up at a farm auction in rural California was unusual enough to make people nervous. Sammy had learned to handle these situations with a combination of confidence and charm. So, he simply nodded politely to the nearest group and found a spot near the back where he could observe without drawing more attention than necessary. The woman whose property was being auctioned sat on the porch steps, a thin figure in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her name, Sammy would later learn, was Elena Reyes, a Mexican-American woman whose husband had died of a heart attack 6 months earlier, leaving her with a small vineyard, substantial debts, and 2 daughters away at college who didn't know their mother was losing everything their father had built. Standing next to the auctioneer's makeshift podium was a man in a dark suit who looked distinctly out of place among the farmers. Bank representative, obviously. His presence told Sammy everything he needed to know about why this auction was happening. The bank wanted its money, and it wanted it now, and it didn't care that Elena Reyes had spent 30 years building this operation with her late husband. The auctioneer, a local man named Bill Crawford, called for attention. Folks, we're here today for the auction of the Reyes property. 42 acres, most of it in mature grapevines, plus the house, barn, and equipment. We'll be selling as one lot to start, but if that doesn't work, we'll break it into parcels. Minimum bid is $12,000 to cover the outstanding mortgage. The man in the dark suit raised his hand immediately. $12,000. No one else moved. $12,000 was more than most of these farmers made in a good year. They'd come to watch, maybe to pick up some equipment if it went to individual lots, but bidding against the bank for the whole property, that was beyond their means. "I've got 12,000, Crawford announced. "Do I hear 13? Elena Reyes sat perfectly still on the porch steps, staring at her hands. Sammy recognized that posture. He'd seen it before, in himself, in his father, in every performer who'd been told they weren't good enough, weren't the right color, weren't welcome. It was the posture of someone trying to maintain dignity while the world took everything from them. 13,000, Sammy called out, surprising himself as much as everyone else. 50 heads swiveled in his direction. The bank representative turned around slowly, reassessing the well-dressed black man he dismissed as a curious bystander. "I have 13,000, Crawford said, recovering from his own surprise. "Do I hear 14? 14,000, the bankman said, his voice harder now. 15,000, Sammy responded immediately. Elena Reyes looked up from the porch steps, trying to see who was bidding. The crowd parted slightly, giving her a clear view of Sammy. Their eyes met across the dusty yard, and he saw confusion and hope war with each other in her expression. 16,000, the bank representative said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. He'd been authorized to bid up to a certain amount, and this stranger seemed prepared to go higher. 20,000, Sammy said, and this time the murmur that went through the crowd was audible. The bankman looked at his notepad, did some quick calculations, then shook his head and walked away from the auction area. He'd been instructed to secure the property cheaply, not get into a bidding war that might cost the bank more than the land was worth. "I have $20,000, Crawford announced, his voice showing the first hint of excitement. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the leather jacket. The crowd erupted in scattered applause, more out of shock than celebration. Elena Reyes stood up slowly, looking like she might faint. Sammy walked toward the auctioneer's table, pulled out his checkbook, and wrote a check for $20,000, while 50 pairs of eyes watched his every move. "I'll need to verify this," Crawford said apologetically. "Call my bank in Los Angeles," Sammy said, writing the number on the back of his business card. "They'll confirm I have the funds." While Crawford made the phone call from inside the house, Sammy stood in the yard, acutely aware of being the focus of intense scrutiny. An older farmer finally approached him. "You're Sammy Davis Jr., aren't you?" the man asked. "Yes, sir, I am." "Thought I recognized you. Saw you perform in San Francisco a couple years back. You're even better in person than on television." "Thank you. That means a lot. Mind if I ask why you just bought a vineyard?" "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure myself. Seemed like the right thing to do." Crawford emerged from the house, looking slightly stunned. "Property's yours, Mr. Davis." Sammy signed the necessary paperwork, accepted a temporary deed, and then did something that made the crowd fall completely silent. He walked over to Elena Reyes, who was still standing on the porch looking lost. "Mrs. Reyes, I'm Sammy Davis Jr. I just bought your property, but I need to talk to you about something important." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I bought this place because I didn't want to see the bank take it from you. But I have no idea how to run a vineyard. I'm an entertainer, not a farmer. So here's what I'd like to propose. You stay here and keep running the operation exactly the way you have been. You make all the decisions about the grapes, the harvest, everything. You keep all the profits from what you sell. In exchange, you pay me $100 a month in rent, which is honestly less than I spend on dry cleaning." "I don't understand," she said, her English accented but clear. "Why would you do this?" "Because I know what it feels like when powerful people try to take everything from you just because they can. I know what it means to work your whole life building something and have people tell you it doesn't matter, that you don't deserve it, that it's time for you to step aside." Tears were streaming down Elena's face now. "But $20,000 is less than I earn in a good month. Mrs. Reyes, money isn't the measure of what matters. This land represents your family's legacy, your husband's work, your daughter's inheritance. That's worth protecting." The crowd had moved closer, everyone straining to hear this conversation. An older Mexican-American man stepped forward. "Elena, you know this man? You trust him?" Elena looked at Sammy, really looked at him and saw something in his face that convinced her. Yes, I trust him." The man turned to Sammy. "I'm Miguel Cortez. I've known Elena and her husband for 20 years. If you're trying to take advantage of her, you'll answer to this community." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Sammy said. "And I'll put everything in writing. Legal contract, signed and witnessed, giving Mrs. Reyes the right to stay here and work this land for as long as she wants, at $100 a month. If she decides to leave, the property goes to her daughters. I'm just the title holder, making it possible for her to continue what she's built." The auction had turned into something else entirely. People were talking excitedly, not about the property, but about what they'd just witnessed. The bank representative had gotten back in his car and left. Bill Crawford was standing to the side, shaking his head in amazement. "I've been doing auctions for 30 years, Crawford said to Sammy. "Never seen anything like this. You know you could have bought that property for half what you paid if you just waited out the bank. But this wasn't about getting a deal. It was about making sure Mrs. Reyes didn't lose her home." Over the next few hours, as Elena showed Sammy around the property and explained how the vineyard operation worked, something remarkable happened. The farmers who'd been suspicious when Sammy arrived started approaching him, shaking his hand, thanking him for what he'd done. By the time he left that afternoon, he'd been invited to dinner by 3 different families and had a standing invitation to return any time he was in the area. The story of what happened at the Reyes Vineyard spread through California's Central Valley farming communities with surprising speed. Within a week, the local newspaper had picked it up. Within 2 weeks, it had made its way to the Los Angeles papers. The narrative was irresistible. Famous black entertainer saves Mexican-American widow's farm from bank foreclosure. Asks for almost nothing in return. What made the story even more powerful was its timing. This was 1963, a year when civil rights demonstrations were happening across the country, when racial tensions were high, when many white Americans were being asked to reconsider their prejudices. Here was a concrete example of someone from a marginalized community helping someone from another marginalized community, with no fanfare, no publicity seeking, just quiet generosity. Elena Reyes became something of a local celebrity, frequently asked to speak at church groups and community gatherings about her experience. She always emphasized the same points. Don't judge people by their appearance. Help others when you have the ability to do so. And remember that kindness can come from unexpected places. "When I saw Mr. Davis get out of his car that morning," Elena would tell audiences, "I didn't think anything except that he was out of place at a farm auction. I didn't think he would save my life. But he did. And he taught me something important. We all make assumptions about people based on how they look, where they come from, what color their skin is. Usually those assumptions are wrong." True to his word, Sammy never interfered with the vineyard operation. He received monthly rent checks of $100, which he donated to a scholarship fund for children of farm workers. He visited the property occasionally, always calling ahead, never treating it like he owned it in any meaningful sense. The vineyard prospered under Elena's continued management. She proved to be an innovative farmer, one of the first in the region to experiment with organic growing methods. Her grapes developed a reputation for quality, and she was able to secure contracts with several premium wineries that paid considerably more than the bulk sales her husband had relied on. In 1968, 5 years after the auction, Elena's older daughter Carmen graduated from UC Davis with a degree in viticulture. She returned home to work alongside her mother, bringing modern scientific knowledge to complement Elena's practical experience. Together, they transformed the modest 42-acre vineyard into one of the most respected small wine grape operations in the Central Valley. Sammy continued his career as one of America's most famous entertainers, but those who knew him well noticed that he spoke with particular pride about a vineyard in California that he technically owned but had never really controlled. "The Reyes women are the real owners," Sammy would say whenever someone brought up the property. "I'm just the guy who made sure the paperwork reflected what was already true. That land belongs to the family that worked it and loved it and understood it." In 1972, Carmen Reyes married a local farmer, and their wedding was held on the vineyard property. Sammy was invited and attended despite his busy schedule, sitting with Elena and her younger daughter on the bride's side of the temporary altar set up among the grapevines. "Mr. Davis," Elena said during the reception, "you made all of this possible. Carmen's education, this wedding, everything we've built since that terrible day when we almost lost it all. You built this, Mrs. Reyes. You and your daughters. I just made sure you had the chance to keep building. Still, I want to talk to you about something. Carmen and I have been saving money. We'd like to buy the property from you, pay you back the $20,000 you spent." Sammy shook his head. "Keep your money. Invest it in the vineyard, in your grandchildren's education, in whatever makes sense for your family. When you're ready to retire, we'll transfer the title to your daughters. That was always the plan. But you've lost money on this. $20,000 for $100 a month? I haven't lost anything that matters. What I've gained is knowing I helped someone when they needed it. That's worth more than any financial return." The impact of Sammy's generosity extended beyond the Reyes family. His actions inspired other successful people in the entertainment industry to look for ways to help struggling families. Several other performers, inspired by Sammy's example, began establishing programs to help farmers facing foreclosure or small business owners dealing with predatory lending. Frank Sinatra, hearing about what Sammy had done, established a similar program in Nevada to help ranchers who were struggling. Dean Martin funded a scholarship program specifically for children of agricultural workers in California. The Rat Pack's reputation for generosity grew in part because Sammy had shown them a way to use their success meaningfully. What Sammy did wasn't just about one family, Sinatra said in a 1970 interview. It was about showing all of us that when you're blessed with success, you have a responsibility to help others. He made it personal. He didn't just write a check to some charity. He saved a specific family's home. That's the kind of thing that changes how you think about what your money is for. In the farming communities of Central California, the story of Sammy Davis Jr. and the Reyes Vineyard became something of a legend. It was told and retold, often with embellishments, but the core truth remained. A famous black entertainer had stopped a bank from taking a Mexican-American widow's farm and then essentially given it back to her. The story took on added significance as discussions about race, poverty, and economic justice became more prominent in American discourse. Here was a concrete example of someone using their privilege and resources to help someone outside their own community, expecting nothing in return except the satisfaction of doing the right thing. Elena Reyes lived to see her grandchildren grow up playing in the vineyard she had almost lost. She watched Carmen's children learn to farm the same land their great-grandfather had planted, carrying on traditions while adapting to modern methods. When Elena died in 1989, her funeral was attended by hundreds of people, including Sammy Davis Jr., who, despite being seriously ill himself, made sure to be there. At the funeral, Carmen spoke about her mother's life and the day that had changed everything. "My mother taught us that you never give up, that hard work matters, and that sometimes angels show up when you least expect them." Mr. Davis was our angel, though he'd probably hate hearing me say that. After the service, as Sammy prepared to leave, Carmen pulled him aside. "Mr. Davis, my mother left instructions. She wanted you to have this." She handed him a small wooden box. Inside was a bottle of wine made from grapes grown on the property, with a handwritten label that said, "From the Reyes family vineyard, with gratitude for the man who saved our home, Elena Reyes, 1963 to 1989. She had been saving this since our first really good harvest," Carmen explained. "She said it was for you, for the day when she couldn't thank you in person anymore." Sammy held the bottle carefully, his eyes wet. "Your mother didn't owe me anything. What she built here, that was all her. She knew that, but she also knew that without you, she wouldn't have had the chance to build it. That's what she wanted to thank you for. The chance." A year later, in 1990, when Sammy Davis Jr. died, the Reyes family was among the thousands who mourned him. But they mourned him not primarily as an entertainer or a celebrity, but as the man who had seen their crisis and chosen to help, who had used his resources to protect someone else's dreams, who had demonstrated that real wealth is measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you preserve for others. The vineyard still operates today, run by Elena's grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Visitors who know the story can see a small plaque near the main house that reads, Reyes Family Vineyard, established 1948, preserved 1963, in gratitude to Sammy Davis Jr., who understood that sometimes the greatest gift is giving someone the chance to keep building what they've started. If this story of unexpected generosity, a stranger's kindness, and how one decision at an auction changed a family's destiny moved you, make sure to like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to remember that real wealth is using what you have to help others keep what they've earned. Have you ever witnessed someone step up to help in an impossible situation? Tell us in the comments about times when generosity changed everything. Hit that notification bell for more stories about legends who understood that success means nothing if you don't use it to help others succeed.